Namaste. The missing link, especially in modern yoga, seems to be Pratyahara, that fifth of the limbs of Maharishi Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. When we talk about Ashtanga Yoga, it can be understood as being comprising of the Bahiranga and Antaranga, the external and the internal. And most of the time, the first 5 limbs, that is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama and Pratyahara, are placed in the Bahiranga, the external limbs, whereas Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi are placed as the Antaranga or the internal. Swami Geetananda Giri used to feel that Pratyahara deserves to be in the Antaranga, and hence used to divide it as Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama being Bahiranga and Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi as Antaranga, with then Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi being the Samyama. Pratyahara is very important because it is the bridge between the external and the internal practices. It is that point where we make a choice. What is that choice? That choice is the choice to withdraw ourself from the senses. Maharishi Patanjali tells us in the second pada, the sadhana pada, that svavishaya asamprayoge chittasya swarupanukara iva indriyanam pratyahara. He says we have a tendency to go and attach, identify with the sensory objects. The ability to come away from it, asamprayoge. Samprayoge is to attach. Asamprayoge, to come away from it. That is what Pratyahara is all about. And he says through that, tata parama vashyata indriyanam, through the practice of Pratyahara, one attains a mastery over the indriyas. You move from an indriya jala, being entangled in a web that is made of the senses, to a state of indriya jaya, a mastery over the senses themselves. Let us look at this in a bit more detail. The senses are traditionally understood as not just being the 5, but the jnana indriyas, the 5 sensory apparatus of sight, hearing, smell, taste and touch. But then yoga understands that the sense of action, karma indriyas, are also part of the sensory apparatus. So the sense of locomotion, the sense of dexterity, the sense of procreation, the sense of excretion and the sense of communication, the karma indriyas are also involved in this. And it's taken to a next level when they add mind as the super sense, making 11 senses. Now these senses, the jnana indriya and karma indriya, are tied into the pancha mahabhutas of earth, water, fire, air and ether, that are then also tied into the subtle elements which are related to these in the sense of smell, taste, touch, sight, as not just being the organ but a sense that is called a tanmatra. However, all of these are linked to the spinal centers when we understand it through yoga and the chakra model. So Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata and Vishuddha, these are the 5 spinal centers that are in all vertebrates that are related to this. So we share it with all our animal fellow beings. And what is it that makes us human? The power to choose. And that is where the 6th of the centers, the ajna, the brow center comes in, because it is at this point we have the power to choose. So basically the animals, the subhuman beings, they are locked in a reactivity because of the spinal nature. But as a human being, we can go beyond our tendency to be reactive and not be a reactive species anymore, but start to become responsive, and that ability to respond is what comes from the cortical, especially the neocortical sense of responsibility. So this brow center is the key when we want to understand Pratyahara and how to bring it into practice. Most of the time this is not mentioned in yoga circles, and if it's mentioned, it is sort of as a hypothetical, conceptual, something in the sky concept. Where do you bring it into your practice? Well, when you want to bring it into your practice, this brow center is the key to it. Because the more you strengthen the energy flow in the brow center, the more you become conscious of the brow center, the more you choose to reside in the power of choice, which is a power of now, that is where you start to become a master of the senses rather than being a mere slave to them. And when we go into this, it's something that one really has to work on, because it is very easy to fall into the trap of the senses and attach to them. Because the senses are always going outward. They are always going towards the external world. They are looking for food, they are looking for nourishment, they want to attach to something. And we sort of become an accomplice to them because we do not stop them. We sort of, in our voyeuristic tendencies, just go behind them and think, let us see what is there, let us feel what is there, let us taste what is there. And what happens is, before we know it, we get entangled in the web, and that is that Indriya Jala, that web, that snare of the senses. Entangling and disentangling is a bit difficult. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of work. So here the power of choice, where what you are saying is, you are not dumbing down the senses. People think that you have to desensitize yourself for Pratyahara. On the contrary, as Swamiji would say, you heighten the abilities of your senses. You make them the best they can be. You see the best you can see. You hear the best you can hear. You feel the best you can feel. And then you choose to withdraw yourself. It is a type of vairagya, non-attachment, a non-passionate, ability to move away from it, and rather than have a subjective sensory experience, you start to become objective towards your own subjective sensory experiences. You take a step back. You have the experience, but you understand it with objectivity as if it is an experience rather than my experience. So instead of I see it, you are just seeing it without attachment. You are just hearing it without attachment. You are not identifying with it as this is what I saw, this is what I heard, this is what I felt, because the moment you do that, you have just walked into their trap. But the moment you take that step back, and that is where the prefrontal cortex, the power of choice, the Bhrumadhya, the Agya Bindus and the Agya Chakra come into play. So all the yoga practices that work on the brow center are going to help us strengthen the ability to live, experience Pratyahara. And this is where one of the practices that we can actually do, and we do quite often, is the Shanmukhi Mudra. The Shanmukhi Mudra, we close off the senses in a conscious manner, and what we try to do is go in. And of course, we add the Nada Pranayama like the Brahmari to it, so that we start to become part of that inner experience, shifting from an outer experience to an inner experience. Of course, the height of Pratyahara is to go beyond that also, beyond the inner experience, until you experience the self itself. But Shanmukhi Mudra is a good one, and if you do it while you are in Padmasana, you are not going to be experiencing the sense of locomotion, dexterity and all this running around that is there. So the Jnana Indriya, Karma Indriya are brought into a state where you can start to go in. So performing Shanmukhi Mudra, sitting in Padmasana is a good idea. It's a good training, at least from the external point of view. But then starting to focus the mind on the breath is a very beautiful power of choice. Instead of letting the mind run out, You are bringing the mind to the breath. What you are doing is, you are saying, I'm going to keep you busy. You want to do something like the demon that comes out of the genie that comes out of that bottle. You have to keep it busy all the time. The mind's like that. You say, okay, I'll keep you busy. Keep thinking about the breath. And because you are going to be constantly breathing the whole day, your whole life, the mind starts to get something to be kept busy with, rather than going out looking for sensory experience. And so watching the breath, focusing consciously on your breathing pattern, and then going into all the pranayama techniques actually helps us start to work towards pratyahara. But then Swamiji's teaching, he gives us two specific practices called the Prana Kriya and Shabda Kriya, which are very, very beautiful practices of pratyahara. The Prana Kriya is focusing at the Bhrumadhya, and as you breathe in, you feel the prana moving out through this brow center, and as you breathe out, you focus as this comes back in, settling into the Ajna Bindu, which is basically the hypothalamo-pituitary axis. And what you are doing is that you are enhancing the power of being able to go out and come back in, and finally you settle inside in that beautiful sense of being established in a state of sensory mastery. The Prana Kriya is a very useful technique. Similarly, the Shabda Kriya, because one of the powerful senses which makes us react is hearing. And you hear a sound and you react suddenly. So the Shabda Kriya, you are going to be doing in a lying down supine posture like Shavasana. And what you start to do is that you start to go out and start to hear the sounds that are in the periphery. You start to go out as much as possible until you can hear the most distant sound, and then you start to retrace your steps as you come back within and start to focus on the internal sounds until you go deep within, and that deep within is where that silence is. The Shabda Kriya is a very beautiful one. It can also be done by focusing on the loudest sound in your environment, the quietest sound in the environment, the loudest sound within you, the quietest sound within you. So using sound as a means to explore going out but then coming in, and all these techniques always end on the internal aspect, because ultimately the journey is not of controlling the senses. People often think Pratyahara is controlling the senses or withdrawing the senses. No, it is withdrawing your mind from the senses. You are disentangling yourself from the senses. You are not controlling the senses. Control has a very negative connotation, especially these days. So it's not that I'm not going to see that, I'm not going to see that, but what you are going to do is that you are still seeing it, but you are no longer reacting to what you are seeing. You have moved from that spinal cord tendency to react reflexively, and now you are responding reflectively. Reflexive spinal cord reactionary behavior is now moving up the spine to the cortex, which is where we are human, prefrontal neocortex, and we are becoming reflective. Swadhyaya is self-reflection. And at that point, developing an ability to respond in the appropriate manner. So learning to respond in an appropriate manner to sensory stimulation is also part of the Pratyahara process. And so it is not shutting your eyes, shutting your ears, shutting down your nose. It's not desensitizing, but it is sensitizing. It is like a computer. You make your computer the best hardware, the best software, and then at the end what you do is pull the plug. So in the process of Pratyahara, what we are doing is not desensitization, but sensitization, and then go beyond that sensitization. Now, one of the key aspects of this is also the Ohm Japa. Because especially when the Ohm Japa is done, what the Ohm Japa does, the Om has the power to quieten the limbic system. And this limbic system is very much tied in with our reflexive, our reactionary behavior, emotional behavior. And that is why when you can quiet down the emotions through the Om Japa, what you are actually doing is giving a space, you are giving a gap, that gap in which you can respond rather than react. So when we are talking about Pratyahara, each of the practices of yoga, the yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, are building us towards the experience of Pratyahara. But in Pratyahara, it is not at the physical level, it is not at the external level that I don't see something. But it is at the internal level that I see it, but I choose not to react to it. And I am going to respond as appropriate. Now this would be tough enough as it is with the 5 senses, then adding the karmendriya, but then Swami Geetananda Giri goes one more step further and he says, well, you have to deal with 18 senses. And I remember one of our students, he said, oh my God, just when I thought it was tough enough, I come to know we have 18 senses that we have to withdraw from. A very, very tough call. And Swamiji expands this in a very beautiful way, as with most of his teachings, that the sight, sound, smell, taste and touch, the first layer, which are the normal senses, then going into the sense of warmth, cold, pain, the sense of kinesis and the sense of balance as a bit more internal senses, then the sense of thirst, hunger and sex, which are also a sense, come in. Then going into what would be called the higher senses or the super senses of clairvoyance, clairaudience, where you are having that ability to see without seeing, hear without hearing, taste without tasting. And then going into psychokinetic senses, and then the psychosympathetic senses of sympathy, empathy and even pity, where there is that sense of empathy. It is a higher sense, it is an inner sense, but still it is a sense. And Pratyahara is to go beyond not just the gross, not just the inner, but even the subtlest of senses, until we are residing in our own self. That Swarupa is where we want to be. And of course, the higher compassion, a very beautiful sense, but at the sense that actually is very beautiful on your journey, that sense of compassion, and especially the higher compassion, comes from an ability to see the bigger picture, a sense of self-reflection, a sense of responsibility, but then to also transcend that. Well, Pratyahara is a very large topic. There's a lot to understand. And what is most important is that we start working on it. We start realizing that we as a human being are not meant to be a reactive species, but are meant to be a responsive one. Someone who can respond, develop the ability to respond, grow spiritually, see the bigger picture, and then finally transcend the sensory experience. Without that, the samyama practices of dharana, dhyana, samadhi can never really be fruitful. Let us start today. Let's start to understand our senses, enjoy them, finally transcending them. Namaste.